I think that we all see the theme this evening. What does the legacy of Black Muslims in the United States mean to you?
Thank you. Salams. So one, I guess maybe pardon my appearance. I actually was running back and just finished knocking doors today. So we're doing resources for all of our, sending out resources to all of our constituents in House District 88, just food assistance, utility assistance, rental assistance, things like that. So I've been doing all of that kind of back to back to back. This is the last thing I have today. So, but I think for me, there are so many, I guess, kind of intersecting parts of my identity that allowed me to be here with you all today. And being Black in America and in Oklahoma, right, is a really, really big part of that. I think about the legacy that my mother, my father, my grandmother, and everybody else in my family, right? My grandfather all kind of leave for me and what they taught me growing up. And I think one of the most formative lessons I had as a child was that my voice was going to always be very powerful. And so to use it whenever I had an opportunity to, right? And to also make sure that I am continuously advocating for other folks, right? Amplifying other voices when I don't have a lens that they do. I can tell you that I never thought I would be a representative. I never wanted to be a representative. I ran for office back in, I guess, started in 2019, and ran because when before this, I was a community organizer for the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, and specifically in doing the work at the Oklahoma legislature, I realized that the people who made policy about our everyday lives, like I grew up, my father and my grandfather incarcerated, and the people who made policy about our everyday lives would never have to deal with the other side of that policy, right? Would never have to live like us. My family came to Islam via the corrections system, right, or the carceral system. My father and my grandfather were in prison and converted while in there. So to hear the Imam speak, right, but also I remember the first time I heard the Imam speak, which was at Masjid Mumin in Oklahoma City a couple of years back, and that's the masjid where my parents got married at. But anyway, though, so I wanted to make sure that we were looking for community organizers, folks who had continuously seen the hardship, right, and had seen the drive that community has, right, folks who have been continuously filling the gaps that our government leaves for us when they don't allow us to help make those policies, right? And so I started looking for people to run for office. I started looking for community organizers, activists. I started looking for folks who had been directly impacted by our carceral system, folks who had been on food stamps, right? Folks who had to live like me, like us. And folks started to turn the question back on me, started to ask me when I was going to run for office, when they could volunteer, these different things. And I realized that so much of community organizing, a good portion, if not all of community organizing, is consistently answering a call to action. And the folks of House District 88 were asking me to run for office, and so I did, right? And I think about what that means for my community, right? And I think about what that means for the future of Oklahoma, to have equitable policy, right? To have someone that is always saying, like, are we missing a lens, right? Are there other communities we should be amplifying? Who else is doing this work, right? And I think that is so much of also like what the legacy of being Black, right, in America is, right, and I think even more specifically, right, maybe even being a Black Muslim is what is, right, how do we continuously take care of each other, right? How do we take care of community? I get to be here, right? Most of us, probably a good portion of us, get to be here today because of some form of deep community care. And I think like that is the core of Islam, right, is community care. And so ultimately, right, I think like that's what I think about when I think of the legacy of being Black and Muslim in America, and what that really kind of means, and a little bit of how it brought me to be here on this webinar with you all. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It really is amazing, and thank you so much for the work that you've done leading to your public service as an elected official. One thing that I'm personally really inspired by is your ability to understand and shed light on like the intersectionalities within complex policy issues. Um, can you tell us how you utilize this holistic approach to tackle these issues, and also why it's important to embody an intersectional framework as an elected official?
For sure. I think it's a really big question that I might not be able to like fully, I don't know, encompass or answer, but I think the most effective policymakers are folks who are continuously saying like, okay, do we, like I mentioned earlier, right? Do we have all the lenses, or are there more ways we can bring people into the fold? I don't ever want to make a policy that I didn't talk to as many people as I could about before I do, right? Because there are so many people that are affected, and there are so many people that could be hurt if we don't do community care, right? If we're not continuously thinking of like critically thinking about the policies that we're putting forth. I think the best policymakers are community organizers and activists, right? Folks who have continuously been in the trenches and seen the worst of the worst and either lived to tell the story, right? And or made sure that communities live to tell a story, right? And so whenever I get ready to write a piece of legislation, I make sure that I am reaching out to the folks in the community who are working specifically on that, community organizers and or nonprofits or institutions that are filling those gaps that I'm trying to create policy that so we don't have. Because while I sit at a very kind of interesting intersection, right, there are folks who have had to sit deep in it, right, in a way that probably better equips them to be able to tell me how to do my job. Because I think that's the ultimate thing as a lawmaker, as a policymaker, is that I am elected to listen to the people, and I'm elected to write policy on what they tell me is bettering their lives. And I'm only here to say like, okay, like, and here are maybe some other ways that we can connect, or here are some ways that we could possibly make it better. I'm not here to say absolutely no, right? That's not how we save your community, right? Because I think that's also a really big part too, right? Is that our vulnerable and our marginalized and disenfranchised communities know how to fix themselves, right? And if we've got the power to be able to amplify those solutions, then that is what we're called to do. I think having a savior complex does not, especially in this specific role, does not help anybody, right, but oneself. And like I said, I never in a million years thought that I would be sitting here on a Zoom with you all, right? Certainly didn't think I was going to be the first Muslim elected in Oklahoma. And so, you know, mashallah, like we get to do these really, really amazing things, and I get to wake up in a district that actively chooses me and I choose them, and we get to do this work together. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things, right? Is that we get to continuously wake up and choose to do this work together, this hard, this heartbreaking, but also enriching work that creates a place where we don't just get to scrape by and survive, but we get to thrive. So, and you can't do it. I wholeheartedly do not believe you can do this work without an intersectional lens, right? Without, and do justice to this work without actively thinking about how you're affecting other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. And my last question is, just looking at your resume, you know, you've done so much on a plethora of crucial issues. So for our audience today, especially our up and coming young leaders, can you share some achievements, challenges, or general advice that you have for them?
For sure. I would probably ultimately say, right, like finding what calls to you, like what kind of social issues really call to you is really, really important when you are getting involved in organizing or activism, right? In any way, shape, or form, because you want to make sure that it is something that at the end of the day, you're like, this is some hard work that we're engaging in, right? But it calls to me in a deeper way. So I'm not going to give up on it, because it is very, very easy to get burnt out in this work. So finding something that you are willing to say, like, this is hard, and today was a hard day, but I'm willing to pick it up and do it all over again. I think also being comfortable with the uncomfortable parts of all of these things, right? Is that like, we're continuously moving uphill in a very, very steep hill in some aspects, right? Especially if we live in red states. So understanding, right? Because like I work in a legislature, right? It's very amazing that we have elected our first Muslim in Oklahoma, right? But I work in a legislature where folks that I sit on their committees, right? Whether they're chairs or vice chairs or just like committee members, sit on these committees, and some of my coworkers still won't look at me. They won't say hello to me, right? Won't hear my policies. Like I can't get my own bills heard in my own committees sometimes. And so I think it's very, very important to also realize that like there are some parts of the work that move very, very fast because we all know that we are moving in the same direction, because we all understand, right, that our win is the same, right? And there are some places where it's a lot slower, right? Like me in House District 88, we work very, very fast because we all understand the win is ultimate community care. And we all understand, right, how we want to get there. Me in the legislature work a little bit slower because my end goal is still community care. And some of the folks I work with, that's not it, right? If I'm just being open and honest. So I guess that's also a part, right, is to continuously be honest with yourself about the areas that you're working in, because sometimes, right, the imposter syndrome that we face is honestly just the truth of the people that you work around and with, right? You think like, maybe I don't deserve to be here, or I'm not doing good work, so I shouldn't be here. But sometimes we are doing the best work that we can in the situations that we're in. And ultimately, right, like don't run yourself ragged. I think I did that all throughout college. Any time I could step up and be a leader in any kind of way, shape, or form, I was there. And not to socially climb, but because I'm very bad at delegating. I'm like, okay, like this could be done a little bit better. And so I'm like, let me just go ahead and do it. And so I think the importance of what I have learned now, right? The importance of delegating, right? We all get to learn and grow when we delegate, right? And things might not turn out how you specifically envision them, but yet again, right? If we all determine what the win is and what the means to win is, then there's no way that we can really ultimately fail, right? So I think like those are some of the things. I've gotten awards and things like that, like Oklahoma's like 30 under 30 and stuff like that. But I don't think, for me, I don't think the awards or the titles or things like that are things that I really am too concerned with. I think ultimately it's just the community care at the end of the day. And I like being a community organizer because my style of community organizing is I get to sit back and I get to build something really great, and then other people get to go out in front and shine. And I think like also that's a little bit of my reservation because I am deeply introverted. But I have to be out there in front of people all day, every day, and either on the doors or on the phones or on Zooms and things like that. And so also ultimately making sure that you are taking the time that you need, right, to recharge. And that looks different for everybody. And also noting that self-care is not just how you care for yourself, but it's also how you allow your community to care for you, right? When you're hurting or when you're shouldered too much weight or something like that. And so I think that might be all of the advice that I could share.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, Rep Turner. I know that we are all so inspired by your humility and your dedication to your community. So thank you so much. It was an honor having you tonight. Now I'm going to pass it back to our amazing host, Salima.